As somebody who has mentioned zombies at least once in a video online, I am contractually obligated to talk about Jordie Romero since his passing. We all got a letter about this in September. Romero was obviously known for his brilliant Living Dead films, which introduced and cemented the general idea of zombies in pop culture. But I've already talked about one of his Dead films, Day of the Dead, and I know that there are a ton more that I could talk about. I haven't even really brought up Dawn of the Dead or the original Night of the Living, but I wanted to take some time to focus on some of his lesser-known stuff. He directed The Crazies, which I think was one of the more underrated horror films of the 70s. He wrote and directed the movie Monkey Shines, which is about a paralyzed man who gets a helper monkey who eventually turns evil.
Monkey Shines, a new into terror.
I can't honestly say that it's good, but also nobody should go their life without seeing it once. But he also helped develop a film series that was pretty popular, but when most people think of it, the first name that comes to their mind isn't Romero, it's Stephen King. But it was directed by the zombie godfather himself, so let's take a look at the movie that merged the crowds of both the comic and horror fans. Let's look at Creepshow. Creepshow is a 1982 anthology film featuring short stories written by Stephen King in addition to some newer material. The movie is an homage to old horror comics of the 1950s, like House of Mystery, Tales from the Crypt, and literally any other creepy-sounding paperback. And just like all other horror anthology series I've talked about, it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of quality. I wouldn't say that any of the stories are awful, it's just that they're all pretty wacky, horror-soaked fun with different degrees of how enjoyable they are. We'll go through all of them in succession, but we're going to start with the framing device, which shows that all these stories are coming out of the pages of a horror comic called Creepshow.
The next time, young man, I find you with a worthless piece of shit like this again, you won't sit down for a week, buddy boy.
And in that guy's defense, the last time anyone in his family celebrated Halloween, demonic Irishmen tried to use masks to take over the world, so I'm amazed he's even got a jack-o'-lantern after that.
Stop it!
So the cover of the Creepshow comic is actually mirrored on screen with the ghoulish figure showing up at his window. And that's exactly how I would handle seeing that thing in my window, with a soulless, menacing grin. Not by screaming like a girl and cursing the fact I don't keep guns in the house. Anyway, the first short is called Father's Day, and it shows an uptight, upper-class family taking part in their usual Father's Day tradition, getting together to celebrate the fact that the nasty old patriarch of the family was killed by his daughter on that very day.
It's Father's Day! Where's my cake? You promised me my cake!
Can't really blame her. He seems like a dick. Anyway, she comes to pay her respects, accidentally spills some whiskey onto his grave, which wakes the man from his sleep with a hankering for cake.
It's Father's Day, Imperial. I want my cake.
Papa goes on a bit of a killing spree, taking out family member after family member, including young Ed Harris here. And in the end, I'll be damned, the father finally gets what he came for.
Happy Father's Day.
That is pretty awesome. Next story is called The Lonesome Death of Jordie Verrill, and it stars, dear God, no.
Holy old Jesus!
Rednecky, overacting Stephen King. What did I do to deserve this?
Oh, you done it now, Jordie Verrill? You monkhead!
Is this because I made fun of the Tommyknockers? Anyway, dude finds a meteor in his backyard, and he's kind of dumb, so he does what you'd expect him to do. He touches it and gets some of it in his mouth, causing him to start turning into a green grass monster. And he decides to just drink a giant-ass screwdriver and let the thing grow all over him. And that's pretty much the whole story. Yeah, this is, it's really stupid. It's really corny even by this movie's standards. And it trusts Stephen King to carry the entire segment on his own, which he just cannot. But I'll say that if there's one thing that makes it kind of fun to watch, it's some of King's facial expressions and also his dream sequences, where the local college not only has a department of meteors, but also doctors use meat cleavers for old-timey amputations.
This is going to be extremely painful, Mr. Verrill.
Next up is called Something to Tide You Over, and it stars Ted Danson and Leslie Nielsen. Nielsen's tracked down the man who's been having an affair with his wife, and he threatens her life unless he takes a ride with him down to the beach. He holds him up at gunpoint and tells him to jump into a shallow grave and bury himself up to his neck. He then shows Danson footage of his wife buried in the same exact way he is, and then he leaves for home watching footage of both of them getting drowned by the incoming tide. And you'd think that that's how this story ends, but this is Creepshow, and everything's got to kind of have that extra kick in the ass at the end. This short is pretty damn good. It's a nice short revenge story. You kind of see where it's going to go about halfway through, but it's still fairly tense. It's enjoyable, and Leslie Nielsen is really great as a psychotic character, which I never believed he could pull off.
Gotta hold your breath there, Harry. Gotta hold your breath.
Probably the most remembered scene from Creepshow is the story The Crate, or, in Brad Pitt terms,
What's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
So in this story, a college custodian finds a crate hidden in the basement that seems to have been there for almost 150 years. He gets a professor to help him move it to one of the classrooms where curiosity gets the best of them and... No, the monster's scary. It's scary. It's really good. Anyway, the monster kills anyone else who tries to approach it, leading to one character deciding to use the monster as a means to get rid of his obnoxious, overbearing wife. Yeah, this story is just as mean-spirited as it sounds.
And I swear to God, if you ever touch
Come on, the monkey costume from Trading Places was scarier than that thing. Now, the last story in Creepshow is called They're Creeping Up on You. Oh, wait, before we start, what's the word I'm looking for here? Okay, anybody out there who has entomophobia, this is not a good time for you to look at the screen.
How an apartment can be germ-proof when it's not even bug-proof.
They're Creeping Up on You centers around a germophobic CEO living in a high-tech apartment filled with every type of pollution-detecting and bug-hunting equipment available. And despite his best efforts, his apartment is slowly overrun by cockroaches who get into his furniture, his food, his lights, and his...
I hope you die. I hope you die.
everywhere.
I hope you die.
Now, on the whole, this movie is very enjoyable, and there's some things that I like about it more than others. I love the little nods that connect each of the stories, like the ashtray that's used to kill the patriarch of Father's Day. It shows up next to Leslie Nielsen. That's pretty cool. And some of the performances in this are genuinely good. Like, I loved all of Leslie Nielsen's scenes in Something to Tide You Over.
You are insane.
I promised that you'd see Becky again. I kept my promise. Is that insane?
Oh, you bastard.
He's probably the scariest character in the whole movie because he's the least over the top. You know, to a point. The over-the-top acting in some instances is really fun to watch. You could tell that the cast were at least enjoying themselves a little bit with each story, and they really played up the idea that this was a comic book come to life. Like the woman who plays Billy in The Crate. My God, she is so insanely hateable as a character.
No good at making money. No good at making an impression on anybody. And no good at all in bed.
And you hate yourself just a little bit for it, but there is a lot of joy to be found in her on-screen death.
Oh, God, Henry, what's wrong now?
Not a thing, Wilma. Everything's just fine.
The hateable characters are the best in this. The bug guy from They're Creeping Up on You has some amazing lines, and he's just an all-in-all prick. I mean, look at him talk to somebody whose husband killed himself because of his own actions.
How many men have you killed, you monster?
Only the stupid ones. Only the ones who handed me a knife and then stretched out their throats. Only the ones who, if you'll pardon the expression, fucked up.
Some of the overacting is made a lot easier by the filters and the way that the movie's shot itself, because the way that it's shot and the camera angles and the lights, it's very campy Italian horror style. The comic book atmosphere makes for some of the scenes to turn into actual splash pages, and the colorful backgrounds behind them and that crazy lighting, it makes it look like it's a retro Grindhouse release. And that's not even taking into account the legit on-screen effects. Tom Savini did the effects for this movie when he wasn't busy taking out the trash.
The comic book! The comic book! My kids love these things.
I love them too.
And he got a chance to work on a lot of different great-looking projects. The decaying corpse from Father's Day looks fantastic, and I love every time that he talks. The sea-soaked zombies from the Something to Tide You Over.
We dug a hole for you, Richard. On the beach.
But the most impressive, though, has got to be those roaches.
Mr. Pratt. Mr. Pratt.
Bastard.
There are just so many of them. Every minute of their creeping up on you has more and more of the things until there's no more room for all the roaches in the apartment itself. But they still find their way in. Now, for this scene, the roaches were shipped straight from Guatemala. They were Guatemalan hissing cockroaches. And they were gotten without a proper permit, which meant that between takes, every cockroach had to be counted for inventory. Never complain about your job ever again. Plus, apparently, even with all these things crawling around, they still needed to fill some space for certain shots, so they had the roaches mixed in with a whole bunch of raisins and nuts and stuff. Because this... and this... just weren't enough roaches for this particular scene. Now, the Creepshow series kept going on. There were 2 sequels to it, with less and less involvement from King and Romero each time around. There's a pretty good story called The Raft in Creepshow 2, but I'll be perfectly honest with you, I can't really remember many of the other stories. If you want another anthology that featured Romero's writing, you should check out both Tales from the Dark Side's TV series and the movie, which contains the short The Cat from Hell. Tom Savini sometimes refers to the Tales from the Dark Side movie as the real Creepshow 3, which shows just how far it strayed from the original path.
Ready for another shot, Dad?
On its own, Creepshow is a good anthology flick. It's got some memorable moments, and at the end of the day, that's really all you can hope for with this type of movie. It doesn't have a variety of directors taking part in this, like, say, the Twilight Zone movie, and that's why there's kind of a lack of variety and style, but all of them seem to be working towards the same particular theme, and it all worked really well together. It's got a decent amount of genuine scares, a ton of memorable performances, and overall this fun atmosphere. Also an ungodly amount of camp. So if you're not that familiar with Romero's work and all you really know from him are movies that end with the words "of the dead," you should know that not all of those are flawless, and some of his movies that he did outside of that series were definitely worth watching too. Creepshow is absolutely one of them. And so is Monkey Shines. Seriously, watch it once. Stay tuned for next time, where we're going to take a trip to a bar in Texas for a fairly low-key affair.
What the fuck?
I'm on a Mexican radio.